Welcome to late night horror stories and true crime. Where the streets are silent, the air is cold, and the shadows are never empty. Tonight's story is not legend, it's not folklore. It's a chilling blend of truth and terror drawn from the real case files of an NYPD officer who saw what most refused to believe. Demons don't always wear horns. Sometimes they wear a badge. Sometimes they hide in the corners of apartments, beneath the peeling paint of church basements, or behind the eyes of the people we trust. This is the story of Ralph Sarchie, a man of law who found himself face to face with something far older and far more dangerous than crime. Turn off the lights, lock your doors, and listen closely. This is the Bronx Exorcisms, Evil in Uniform. There is a darkness that hides in the alleys of every great city, behind the neon signs, beneath the footsteps of those who never look up. Some say it is poverty, others say it's madness, but a very few, know better. The Bronx, New York, summer of 1997. The nights were heavy with heat and violence. Sirens sliced through the dark like blades, and the city seemed to breathe only after midnight, when the noise faded and the real monsters came out. Ralph Sarchie had been with the NYPD for 12 years. A good cop. Decorated, tough as nails. He walked with a purpose and talked like a man who'd seen too much to waste time on small talk. His beat was the 46th Precinct, one of the most unforgiving in the city. Drugs, gang killings, domestic assaults, the usual, until things started getting unusual. He kept a journal, not a diary, not even close. A worn, leather-bound notebook tucked into the back of his locker, filled with scrawled notes in all caps, underlined words and odd sketches. He called it his secondary caseload. Unexplained injuries, witnesses going catatonic, suspects speaking in foreign tongues, dead ones at that. Reports he couldn't bring himself to file through proper channels. Too strange, too wrong. One of the first entries in that notebook reads, June 3rd, man found naked in Tremont Alley. Blood on his chest, not his own. Said he gave it back to the altar. No altar found. Eyes were all white. No pupils. EMTs confirmed. Passed out saying the Lord's Prayer backward. At the time, Sarchie didn't believe in anything he couldn't cuff. He dismissed it, chalked it up to drugs, mental illness, too many hours under the streetlights. But something kept clawing at the back of his mind. It wasn't just one case. It was the pattern. The sense that something beneath the crime was working its way through the borough like a sickness. And the deeper he looked, the more his instincts whispered a word he hadn't taken seriously since childhood. Evil. Not metaphorical, not poetic, actual, real, personal. He wouldn't admit it, not then, not to his partner, not even to his wife. But late at night, when the city held its breath and the shadows seemed to lean a little closer, Ralph Sarchie started praying again. Not for safety, not for peace, but for answers. It began like any other call. Domestic disturbance. Apartment 5C. West Burnside Avenue. Neighbors heard screaming, glass breaking, a man's voice rising into a frenzy of howls. Sarchie and his partner Butler arrived just after 2:30 a.m. They expected the usual. A drunk with a short temper, or a couple in a bad argument. But what they found inside that cramped, sour-smelling apartment would haunt Sarchie for the rest of his life. The man was crouched in the far corner of the living room, knees to his chest, blood on his lips, his hands raw, chewed to the bone. There were scratches on the walls, Symbols, crude but intentional, gouged deep into the plaster. The lights were off. The TV buzzed static. And the woman who made the call, a neighbor, stood in the hallway sobbing, saying only one thing. He's not who he was anymore. Sarchie approached carefully, hand on his holster. Sir, NYPD, let's talk. You hurt? No answer. The man raised his head slowly. His eyes were solid black. No whites, no irises. Just darkness reflecting back the hallway light. And then he spoke. But it wasn't speech. It was a sound, deep, guttural, and inhuman. A rumble that rose and cracked like an animal choking on fire. Sarchie stepped back. Butler reached for his cuffs. The man suddenly lunged, screeching a phrase in what would later be identified by a Jesuit scholar as ancient Latin. I call you from the deep, open the gate. It took 4 officers to bring him down. He snapped one man's wrist with a single jerk. Another suffered bite wounds that would later require a rabies series, though no trace of disease was ever found. Back at the precinct under sedation, the man was silent for hours, until he looked directly at Sarchie through the holding cell bars and said, in a whisper, Your daughter's name is Christina. She sleeps with the light on, but she won't see tomorrow's sunrise. Sarchie froze. He had never mentioned his daughter on duty, never filed any personal detail where a suspect might find it. The man had no ID, no priors, no reason to know anything about him. And yet, he did. The voice was recorded. The NYPD's tape system picked it up automatically. But when the tape was reviewed, static, high-pitched warbling, like a distorted broadcast. The man died in custody 3 hours later. Cause, sudden cardiac arrest. No drugs in his system. No underlying health conditions. His body temperature had dropped to 83 degrees. Coroner said it looked like he froze from the inside out. The medical report didn't explain it. Neither did the police report. But Sarchie wrote it down in his leather notebook that night, his pen shaking as he scrawled 4 words beneath the case number. I heard the devil. The man in the cell had been dead for 6 days. Sarchie couldn't stop thinking about the voice, the threat, the symbols carved into the apartment wall, and especially that Latin phrase that meant open the gate. He needed someone who understood things the NYPD did not. That's when he met Father Joseph Mendoza. The introduction came through an old cop who had worked narcotics in the 80s, now a security consultant for the Archdiocese. You didn't hear this from me, the man said, scribbling a name and number on a coffee-stained napkin. But if what you're describing is real, he's the only one who'll believe you. Mendoza was not what Sarchie expected. No collar, no Bible, no calm demeanor. He wore a worn brown coat with a wooden crucifix around his neck, spoke in short, irritated bursts, and had a face carved from years of seeing too much. His eyes were tired but sharp, the kind of sharp that cuts right through lies. They met in a church basement in the South Bronx. No candles, no theatrics, just 2 men, a table, and a file folder marked private. Sarchie opened with the Burnside case, played the warped tape, showed photos of the symbols, described the voice. Mendoza listened in silence. When Sarchie finished, the priest leaned back and said, "You didn't hear Latin. You heard something older layered beneath it, the language of the condemned." Sarchie raised an eyebrow. "You saying I saw a demon?" "I'm saying something used that man to say hello." Mendoza had a theory. Certain parts of the city acted like conductors. Places of violence, despair, decay. They thinned the veil between this world and whatever lies beneath. And certain people, Those vulnerable, broken, or spiritually empty could become gateways. The Burnside Man was one of them. Mendoza had seen similar cases in Detroit, New Orleans, Mexico City. Always the same pattern. Whispers of voices, strange symbols, unnatural strength, and eyes that looked empty. As if whatever was once human had been burned out from the inside. He slid a photograph across the table. It showed an old Catholic school, boarded up and forgotten, its windows shattered. A crooked cross still hung above the door. 3 blocks from where your suspect lived, Mendoza said, and built on land that once held a pagan temple. The city paved over it in 1911. But things don't always stay buried. Sarchie stared at the photo. Something about the building made his skin crawl. He looked up. "You believe all this?" "It's not about belief," Mendoza replied. "It's about understanding the rules." Sarchie didn't know what disturbed him more, the priest's words or how certain he was when he spoke them. Before they parted, Mendoza placed a small vial in Sarchie's hand. "Holy water," he said. "Don't use it unless you have to. But if you have to, don't hesitate." That night, back at home, Sarchie placed the vial next to his service weapon. 2 tools, 2 kinds of war. He had no idea which one he'd need next. The call came on a Tuesday. A woman named Maria Cruz walked into the 46th precinct with shaking hands and wide, sleepless eyes. She wasn't reporting a crime, not exactly. What she said was this: "My daughter isn't my daughter anymore." Maria lived on the 2nd floor of a building in Fordham. Her 9-year-old daughter, Isabella, had been quiet and sweet, a bright kid who loved to draw angels and wore a cross her grandmother gave her. But over the past month, things had changed. First, it was sleepwalking. Then the scratching on the walls. Then the drawings turned darker. Twisted figures with hollow faces, black wings, a man with no eyes standing in the corner. And the voice, Maria swore she heard her daughter talking at night. But it wasn't her voice. It was low, rasping, older. One night she opened the girl's bedroom door and saw her writing on the walls in something dark. Blood, she thought. That's when she knew something was wrong. Not sick, not possessed in the church sense, just wrong. Sarchie went with Butler and Mendoza to the Cruz residence. The moment they stepped inside, the temperature dropped. Mendoza muttered a short Latin prayer under his breath. Butler rolled his eyes. "Come on, man, it's a kid. Probably just needs therapy." But when they reached Isabella's room, Butler stopped talking. The girl sat on the floor, cross-legged, staring at the wall. She didn't blink. Her mouth moved slightly, whispering a language no one recognized, not even Mendoza. There were markings scratched into the paint, same ones from the Burnside case. Same jagged spiral, same crooked X. And on the opposite wall, dozens of pages torn from a Bible, nailed up like wallpaper. Everyone defaced with black marker, lines drawn through every instance of the word God. Mendoza tried to speak with her. She didn't answer. Until he reached into his coat pocket for his crucifix. Then she turned fast, like a snake striking. And she smiled. What came out of her mouth didn't match the size of her throat. It was massive, like something roaring from deep within a cave. "He is watching, priest. The gate is open, and you will burn in your collar." The walls shook. A crucifix above her bed snapped in 2. Sarchie stepped forward, instinct, not reason, and sprinkled a few drops of holy water from the vial onto her forehead. She screamed. Not in pain, in fury. And then she passed out. They rushed her to Mount Sinai. The hospital called in a child psychologist, then 2 more. None of them could explain the episodes. No history of trauma, no signs of schizophrenia. MRI scans showed anomalous neural activity, spikes like a seizure, but localized near the speech center. The church refused to perform an exorcism. No formal authorization, they said. Father Mendoza did it anyway. Sarchie was there. The room smelled of sulfur and iron. The child's voice spoke in triplicate, 3 voices at once in perfect sync. Her body levitated 3 inches off the bed. For a moment her face changed, aged, twisted, inhuman, and she said a name none of them knew, a name not from this world. When it was over, Isabella collapsed into unconsciousness, but she lived. Mendoza called it a partial expulsion. Sarchie called it something else. A warning. That night, back at his apartment, his daughter Christina woke up screaming. Sarchie rushed into her room. On the wall above her bed, written in marker, "The gate is open." He hadn't told anyone what the girl said. No one. And yet, there it was. The walls were closing in. Sarchie hadn't slept in 3 days. He kept hearing things, knocking in the walls, voices under the floorboards, the hum of Latin phrases in the static of his patrol radio. At first, he thought it was stress. Then he noticed Mendoza was hearing them too. Whatever this was, it wasn't isolated. It was growing. It was spreading. And then a break came. One of those moments that seems like coincidence until you realize nothing about this is coincidence anymore. A body was found in the basement of an abandoned community center near Crotona Park. The coroner called it ritualistic. The man's chest had been carved open and emptied. His heart was missing. Around him, burned into the concrete floor, were symbols matching the ones from both the Burnside and Cruz cases. Sarchie and Mendoza arrived on scene within the hour. No media, no press, just darkness and the smell of death. Mendoza crouched near the body, fingers tracing the symbols. Then he whispered, "This isn't just possession. This is invitation." What they found in the far corner of the basement confirmed it. An altar, crude, built from brick and old church pews. Wax dripped in black rivulets across the wood. Animal bones. Hair. A photograph of a child with her eyes gouged out. Not Isabella. Someone else. The apartment lease on the murdered man traced back to a name. Victor Santos. Retired NYPD. Served in Vice during the 1980s. Quietly disappeared from the department in 1991 after a series of internal investigations. No criminal charges, just gone. But according to Mendoza, Santos didn't disappear. He went underground, started a sect, a cult that believed possession was divine, that demons were not enemies, but liberators. He called it the doctrine of the gate. Its followers performed rituals in forgotten corners of the Bronx, abandoned churches, condemned schools, burned-out basements. They believed suffering called the old ones closer. That pain was a prayer. Sarchie obtained an old case file on Santos. Inside, photos of victims with strange markings, reports of ritualized abuse, and in one handwritten note, scribbled by a young rookie at the time. Suspect claims he speaks to a presence in his dreams, says it gave him strength. Repeats phrase, "Open the gate." The same phrase from Burnside, the same phrase from Isabella Cruz. They found Santos days later. He was living in a condemned rectory, 4 blocks from a school that had burned down under mysterious circumstances in 1987. When Sarchie and Mendoza entered, they found the walls painted black. No electricity. The air hung like syrup. And then came the sound, deep, wet breathing from somewhere beneath the floorboards. They found a trap door. Santos was waiting below, naked, kneeling in front of a circle of candles, eyes closed, body covered in scars, each one shaped like the symbols they'd seen, his arms outstretched, whispering. When Sarchie announced himself, Santos opened his eyes. He smiled. "You're the one he marked, the one who's listening." Mendoza raised his crucifix. Santos screamed, not in fear but in rapture. Then he seized. His body jerked violently. Blood poured from his mouth, his spine arched, and he bellowed a voice that did not come from his lungs. The floor began to shake. Candles burst. The temperature dropped so fast that frost formed on the basement walls. Mendoza shouted a prayer. Latin. Powerful. Desperate. Santos rose from the ground, levitated, and then his body burst into flames. No fuel, no ignition source, just fire. By the time they extinguished it, there was nothing left but ash and bone. The coroner ruled it electrical fire. The NYPD classified it as a drug-induced psychotic break, but Sarchie wrote something different in his notebook that night. He flipped back through every case. Burnside, Cruz, the symbols, the voices, and he underlined one phrase: "The gate is open." Winter came early that year. The leaves hadn't even finished falling when the cold settled over the Bronx like a sheet of iron. The murders stopped. The possessions ceased. But it didn't feel like peace. It felt like silence, like something had been fed and was now watching, waiting. Sarchie tried to go back to routine, traffic stops, burglaries, paperwork, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. His daughter Christina had nightmares every night, woke up screaming about a man with no skin. His wife found dead birds lined up on the windowsill one morning. No cause, no blood. And then came the final case. A man was found wandering the grounds of St. Barnabas Hospital, naked, covered in what appeared to be self-inflicted cuts. He kept repeating one phrase: "I see them in the dark. I see their hands." At first, Sarchie didn't recognize him, until he saw the tattoo under the blood. It was one of their own. Officer Michael Reyes. Missing since 1999, presumed dead. Now, returned, but not alone. Reyes wouldn't speak to anyone except Sarchie. Inside a padded observation room, Sarchie sat across from the man he once shared a squad car with. Reyes looked empty. Eyes sunken, skin pale, lips cracked from constant whispering. Sarchie leaned in. "Mike, what did you see?" Reyes slowly turned his head. His voice came out as a dry hiss. "They're coming through. He showed me. He said you'd try to stop it." "Who?" Reyes smiled. "The one you brought with you." At that moment, the lights flickered, the security camera shorted out, and Reyes began to convulse. Mendoza arrived 5 minutes later with a bag already packed. He'd had a feeling. That same electric tension he said he'd felt in Mexico City just before the final gate was breached. They performed the ritual in the hospital basement, away from the press, away from the church. Sarchie locked the door behind them. No one else needed to see what came next. Reyes had to be strapped down. His body writhed, bones cracking in unnatural directions. His voice split again. 2, then 3 layers, screaming over each other. Blood poured from his nose and ears. And then, silence. He looked directly at Sarchie, and it spoke through him. "I'm not here for him. I'm here for you." Sarchie froze. His mouth went dry. He felt pressure in his chest. The room swam. "You opened the door, officer. With every doubt, every fear, every little rage you fed like fire. You invited me." Reyes' body jerked violently. The lights exploded. Mendoza held the crucifix high and roared a Latin command so forceful it echoed like thunder. Reyes screamed. A black mist poured from his mouth, splitting the air like steam from a cracked pipe. Then, stillness. Reyes slumped unconscious, alive. But what had passed through him had gone somewhere else. Sarchie filed a leave of absence the next day. He never returned to the force. He moved out of the Bronx, changed his number, never spoke of the Reyes incident again. Not publicly. But in the box he kept under his bed beside his gun and that leather notebook sat one final item. A cassette tape, no label. When played, it only produced one thing. A deep, guttural voice, whispering from what sounds like beneath the earth. The gate is open. Thank you for joining us this evening for another journey into the cold, dark corners where true crime and horror collide. If tonight's tale sent a chill down your spine or made you think twice before turning out the lights, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We've got many more stories waiting for you. Tales of real evil, haunted lives, and the thin line between what we know and what we fear. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious. And remember, not all monsters live in the dark. Some walk among us